Hello, I'm Filipa Serra Gaspar, and this is SEO in 2025.
Filipa, what's your number one SEO tip for 2025?
So, my SEO tip for 2025 is to refresh and update your old and your existing content that you already have on your website. I really believe that sometimes to make your content fresh, like I said, put a bit of a sprinkle, a fresh sprinkle on a certain article, on old content can really, really make a difference and can really improve your traffic and your rankings in general.
So, why does it make a difference? Why is it so important?
Sometimes, just making that really big, boring chunk of text and maybe turn it into a table, for example, can make such a big difference. Or sometimes when you wrote that article, there was a certain user intent behind it, but then later, with time, that user intent has changed, let's say. So you really have to make sure that that content that you posted is up to date because of course that if you have a piece of content that is no longer interesting for the user or is no longer up to date, it can really create that the user will open it, will see it's not really what they're looking for, and then they'll go back to the SERP page. So I think it's really important to keep the content relevant and really match that user intent. Yes.
So, how do you select the content that needs to be refreshed?
Okay, so I would say the first step would definitely be to make content audit. You can go to your, let's say it's a blog, for instance. You can go to your set of articles and you can check where did you actually lose traffic. For example, the last month comparison to the same period of time last year, for instance. Or where do you really have, the average ranking for a certain keyword? If it dropped a lot, why is that? Because sometimes the clicks or the traffic can decrease because maybe there's less interest on that topic. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's your article, that it's no longer fresh and updated. But sometimes if you really see that the keyword average position is lower, is getting
It's dropping.
lower, is dropping, exactly, then it might mean that your content is no longer that interesting. And that content audit can be done by looking at the search intent as well, also looking at the competitors, what new keywords or what new content do your competitors have that you don't, what really can be done to make it fresher.
So, it might mean that the content's no longer interesting, but it also might mean that no one wants to actually read that content anymore. So, how do you make the decision between when to refresh the content, when to delete the content, or when just to leave it alone?
Well, I guess that by looking at the search volume, for example, if suddenly you were targeting a primary keyword for a certain URL that suddenly doesn't have that much search volume anymore, then maybe you are not necessarily doing anything wrong. If there was a bit of a decrease on the traffic, for example, so maybe just leave it alone, or if the average position is just different, or just the scenario switched completely, you might as well leave it alone. But then if you see that there's a growth opportunity, if you see that your competitors are mentioning something that you're not, then you might see an opportunity. Of course, I'm not saying that you should change completely the topic of the URL, because of course you should maintain it, but it is important to just make sure that it is updated. A very, very easy example would be, I don't know, what's the best smartphone, for example. If you search for it right now, or if you do search for it, a month ago, maybe not a month ago, but a year ago, the results are completely different. But still the content is kind of like, the user is still looking for the same. So in that sense, of course, you should update it if that's the case. But sometimes there is also possibilities to either, merge two articles if that's the case, or even sometimes split them because the topic is getting too complex, and you also don't want to make an article too big, let's say. So you can also split it into two. It's really hard to say, like, it really depends on what the content is about.
So, I mean, do you have a specific example? I mean, how do you go about making the decision where in the content to refresh it, where to add new content, when to actually blend two articles together? Did you have some decision that you've made in the past that shows an example of that?
Yes, some content that I do update on a regular basis, and because I've been working on like the pet industry for a while, sometimes people really look for the pet welfare laws. For example, this kind of content is something that you really should be updating all the time. Or, for example, beaches that you can go with your pets in Spain, for example. Sometimes you just make sure that it is updated, and then we can add, in 2024 or in 2025 to actually, when the user sees it, they know it is updated. So they will know that's like the right place to go. Also, sometimes there's a lot of interest, for example, in certain dog breeds. You can see that there's a spike, and then suddenly there's not so much traffic anymore. Sometimes there are things to improve, but sometimes not really, because there was just a spike on a certain type of breed or on a certain type of diet or something like that. Also, the diets of dogs, sometimes what is the best food that I can give to my dog, let's say, and then you can see suddenly that a small subtitle that you had on that article is becoming very popular. So you might transform that small paragraph on your article into an actual, article just about that specific topic. And then I would say it is obviously very important to link the articles between each other because, if the user wants to read more, they can keep reading more and they don't need to leave your website, So you kind of like retain them and they really can find all the information that they're looking for within your website, right?
Do you usually end up with more words than there were previously? So you add content, but you add more content than you take away? Or does the word count not really matter?
Well, I mean, I would say it does matter, not always, because obviously there's not one formula that fits all. So I would say, yeah, it really is important to see. Sometimes you really have to reason. Uh, you know, shall I just add a small paragraph to an article that already exists, or I might as well just create a new one? Because also, again, the user intent, I believe you should put, the user intent of that main keyword of that article in the first place so the user can find it immediately. But then if they want to keep reading more, the information should be there. But again, if it's too long, then let's just make a new article about it if there's enough information. But in terms of like, if I usually end up with more or less words, it really depends. I try not to make such drastic changes, let's say, to not make the article too extensive, or sometimes it's really just small changes. Again, I'm not really saying, to add huge chunks or of text or delete it, but make sure it kind of like stays the same, but fresh. Like I said, just sometimes it's just a sprinkle, sometimes it's just changing the year and just making sure it's updated. Maybe just add a certain word on the meta title or on the H1. Sometimes it might be just a small detail, sometimes not really. So yeah.
What tools do you use for this? What tools do you use to actually uncover content that has perhaps dropped a little bit and identify opportunities here? And then what tools do you use to actually decide how to enhance the content?
Okay, so for instance, I can have a look on Google Search Console, let's say, and really find out. I think I mentioned that already, but for example, comparing just the clicks of the last, you can do previous 28 days comparison to last year and see where do you see these big drops. Sometimes also, if you have a certain URL, you can see that you don't have that many clicks, but you are starting to get impressions for a certain set of keywords. It might mean that, there's a bit of an opportunity there of a certain content that article is kind of like ranking for, but maybe, on the 10th of or 11th position, we never really know, might be getting some impressions. So that would be a really good one. Then, of course, for search volume, I usually like to use Ahrefs or SEMrush if I'm improving a set of URLs. Even like you can create a project where you can kind of like have an overall overview of all that those updates that I've been doing in a certain period of time. And then, if I want to have the whole set of URLs, I mean, I can also use, I don't know, Screaming Frog, maybe. Okay, I just want to do the blog post, or maybe I can also do, just the services or the product descriptions. It really depends on what I choose to work for. But in the end, it is a lot of information coming from a lot of places and kind of like mixing it up, of course. Yeah, and then you can also use, more like analytics, like more the traffic. Sometimes I would also use, it's not always, it's a bit complex, but also like, engagement metrics, like does the bounce rate get smaller? Does it actually increase? The time spent on the page, which can also be tricky because sometimes the time can be lower because the user finds it straight away. But, depending on what the content is about, those metrics can also help you, so through like analytics, Google Analytics or Adobe or, yeah.
So, what are you looking to happen once you refresh your content? Is success measured just by improved rankings for your target keyword phrases?
Well, again, not necessarily. You can look at many, many metrics. I would say if the average position of a certain keyword improves, it should be a good sign, right? But then again, there's so many more things to look at, so many more metrics to look for. Then, like, yeah, also you have to give it some time. Sometimes you might see results quite quickly, but sometimes it might take also a couple of months. But again, it's trial error. It might work, it might not work. It's kind of like tricky. And also, one of the things that I forgot to say before is that also sometimes it might not only be about changing the text itself, but also like I wanted to mention that sometimes just adding like, for example, a video to your text or adding schema, sometimes it can also help. So sometimes when I'm talking about, making the content fresh, it can also be more like not exactly the text, but a bit more like also technical issues that can be, just making sure that the URLs that you are improving or the URL is just like in good health. And it's really like, yeah, working well in general.
And you talked about maybe adding video or other elements to the page. How do you make the decision as to what content you need to add to the page?
I mean, I would say, for example, for video, since we are talking about it, like if you put a certain keyword on Google, let's say we were talking about the pet industry before, right? So let's say that we're searching for how to train my dog for, I don't know, for a certain game or for a certain, how to say, trick. And suddenly you see there's a drop on a URL on an article that you had about it. And then you go on Google and you see that all the competitors ranking on top have a video. So, that might mean that, if you add a video as well, you might also start ranking higher. Of course, video, it requires a lot of resources and it's not an easy thing to do. But maybe there is already a YouTube video that you have on your company that you can use it and bring it to the article, for example. So sometimes doesn't have necessarily to be a huge effort, but sometimes something small can make a difference. So in the case of video, that could be one thing. And then I don't know if you don't have schema. Okay, let's try and have it. Do my competitors have schema implemented on their website? Okay, then let's try and have it as well, for example. Sometimes it's really like, what are the topics that maybe my competitors are not mentioning? And if I was a user, I would like to see on the article. So maybe try it like that. Yeah.
If an SEO is struggling for time, what should they stop doing right now so they can spend more time doing what you suggest in 2025?
Well, I mean, like I was saying, we really have often, limited resources. And sometimes as SEOs, we focus so much on creating new content, on new content. We want to have 10, 20, 50, 100 articles per month or per week. And sometimes if we don't have that much resources, that much time, why not just look back at what we already have, and really try to make it better. Like I said, sometimes it can be just one word that can make the whole difference. So really go back to the content that we already have, make a small audit or a big one, well, depends, and really trying to have content that replies to the users. So it also builds trust. It drives conversions. I think it can be really good, because also it can be damaging to have outdated information, outdated articles on our websites. Yeah.
Filipa Serra Gaspar is an SEO consultant, so you can find her over at seolipa.com. Filipa, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2025.
Thank you.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2025, the book, over at seoin2025.com.